Hi everyone, it's Anup Kumar here again. And this is a follow-up to the last video I made where I talked about the coronavirus and the things that we can do to help ourselves in this situation. After that last video, I got a lot of requests to elaborate more upon it and to talk about what kind of tips or what kind of behaviors that we may be able to use to help us in the situation. And I have two thoughts on that. The first one is with regard to what's actually happening regarding the pandemic and the coronavirus, the basics I talked about in the last video. We can go into all kinds of details about that, but the basics were, the defensive approach about physical distancing, and then the things that we can do for our immune system. And beyond that, I think those are the main things to do. We could to elaborate upon that endlessly. I don't think it's that helpful. I think it's sticking to the basic things that would help us. I do want to touch on number 2, which was the big questions in life. Some people said, well, you kind of left us hanging. You said that, understanding birth and death or understanding the big questions, these are important. But what do we do about that? How do we actually address those things? And so I want to talk about that a little bit today. And I want to start that by saying that there are 3 kinds of education that anyone might receive in their lifetime. Okay, there are 3 kinds of education that any one of us might receive in our lifetime. The first one is one that we all get. And that education starts right when we're born, when the people around us start telling us who we are, right? So for me, the people around me started saying, "You're Anup. Your name is Anup," right? And they started telling me that what you are is this head. This is your head, and these are your arms, and these are your legs. And so the grown-ups around me were constantly telling me what I was, and I grew to learn and understand, okay, this thing here is called Anup, and that is what I am, and nothing else here is what I am. And I'm made of these things called a head and arms, and this kind of basic orientation to this lifetime is the first education that we all get. The second education we all get is the education we receive in school. So that's your math, science, language, history, all this kind of stuff, right? So these are the ideas, the concepts that we're all given during school. And hopefully we experiment with those, we study those, we learn from them, we try to do hands-on work with them. This all constitutes our second type of education. And this can continue, right, to high school and then college and then maybe graduate school. You can keep on going. You can get more degrees. There's no end to this type of education, really. You can always keep learning. That's the second education. And the third education is about our deeper, more essential nature that may or may not happen in this lifetime, right? What do I mean by that? Well, when we're all born, we have a certain awareness, and it is that awareness that then learns education number 1 and education number 2, right? There's a basic awareness that is then told, you are Anup, right? Or you are Jane, or you're John, or you're Jose, or whatever the name might be. And that what you are is this head and this torso and this abdomen, all the stuff. There is an awareness that learns this, right? And that assimilates these perceptions and these concepts into an identity structure, right? And that's where education 1 comes in. This basic awareness, our basic mind, if we call it that, gets this education 1 and then can proceed to education 2, right? Where now this identity structure, which we've gained in our first education, learns math and science and all the other kind of stuff, right? So the third education is about that basic awareness itself prior to the conditioning as a particular identity, right? And this is the kind of education that may or may not happen. Or if it happens, many times it gets distorted into certain beliefs or certain concepts, right? And that can happen in what we call religion, or it can happen in spirituality, or it can happen in philosophy, where we start telling a bunch of stories and using a bunch of terms, but we may not actually know what these things correspond to, right? They're these kind of vague ideas, but there's no direct experience of what they mean. So the third education is elucidating this, the more essential nature of what we are, and what are the terms that correspond to that in our culture and our language, and how does that influence our sense of identity and our experience of a lifetime, right? So this is the third education. And I would say that this third education is the most essential one, right? To function in this world and to be recognized in this world and to have a role is basically the first and second education, the first and second types, right? But to live well, to be grounded, to be able to manage even when there are crises happening, to see beyond the confines of what we call birth and death, to have that kind of depth is really the third education, and I would consider it the most essential. Now, you can't really say the others aren't important. They all go hand in hand. To be a person in this lifetime, in this culture, means having all three kinds of education. But what I see happening, unfortunately, is that the first and especially the second kind of education, the kind of education that we can get in school, can often actually be a barrier to the third kind. Because what happens in school often is that we get these tests to do that test our understanding of these concepts, and then maybe you get 100% on the test or you get an A on the report card, and then you start to believe that I know something. Okay, now, yeah, certainly we know something, but what it does is it makes us value these particular concepts. It makes us value intellectual structures. And these structures, while helpful, have nothing to do with our more fundamental nature. All right, so a person can have an advanced degree, right? So I can go to, after college, I can go to medical school and I can go to management school and maybe get a PhD. I can have all kinds of degrees. And what that does is it creates a certain thought structure. And if I have not yet done the introspection to know that what is most essential is not actually conceptual, is not just a thought structure, then that becomes an impediment to me understanding that deeper nature of myself. So this third education is essential, and it's what religion and spirituality and philosophy, etc., try to talk about. But nowadays, I think, don't necessarily talk about it well, or they talk about it in very restrictive ways. You have to think this, you have to use this name, you have to have this belief, otherwise it's not valid, or otherwise you can't really know. Well, I think those are actually impediments to learning, to real learning and real understanding. And that's what I was alluding to when I was talking about the big questions. How do we answer these big questions? It's by looking into this deeper awareness, right? What were we like before we had a name, right? What was that awareness? What was the nature of that awareness before we gave it a name, Anoop, or whatever the name is? Before we said that it had a head and it had an arm and it had legs. Yes, it has those. Those experiences are part of what we are, but they are not by any means all of what we are. And the difference between those two is the difference between wellness and some other experience of life. So what is the doorway to this? Right? How do we get education number 3? Do I have to go to a religious institution? Do I have to say that I'm spiritual? Do I have to inquire into philosophy? No, you really don't, because everybody has the same tools, right? And the most important tool, the gateway to the third education, is your personal mind, right? The gateway to the third education is the personal mind for everybody, for everybody. Now, once we go through that gateway, things can change. And the way we perceive things can change. The way we perceive ourselves, the way we perceive the world. And that's why this third education is so important. But fortunately, all of us have that schoolhouse within ourselves already. So I was actually inspired by some of the stuff I've seen from celebrities around the world. Like I saw Roger Federer issue a challenge where he's hitting a tennis ball against a wall over and over really rapidly, and it was pretty cool. So other people tried to replicate that, and other celebrities joined in. My wife recently told me about Simone Biles, the Olympic gold medalist, issuing a challenge where she did a handstand. So for all the people who are stuck at home, quarantining, all these things, this is some form of entertainment that we can do. So I thought, okay, why not issue a mind challenge? So the mind challenge I'm going to issue is a simple breathing practice where for 1 minute, we try to breathe. And for that 1 minute, the mind's attention should entirely be on the breath going in and coming out. So when we breathe in through the nose, the air enters the nostrils, it goes back to the nasopharynx, and then it goes down to the front of the neck through the trachea and into the lungs. All right? So when you breathe in, If the mind is attentive, you'll feel that the nostrils will cool down, the back of the nasopharynx will cool down, and you'll feel cool air going down into the trachea. And then when you exhale, it will warm up, because once the air enters the body, it warms up. And then the chest contracts again, the pressure in the chest goes up, and the air is forced out. So going in will be cool air, and coming out will be warm air. So for 60 seconds, we're going to try this, and the mind should be entirely on just feeling this air, cool, warm. Okay? So we'll just say no thoughts, right? It may not be possible, but we're just going to say no thoughts. And when the thoughts do come, as they do, then the idea is to just let it go to the side, right? Notice the thought is there, and then let it go to the side and bring the attention back to the air coming in and out. This is the 60-second mind challenge. I'm going to do it right now. I don't have a timer, so I don't know how long it'll be, but I'm going to do it for about a minute right now. You can do it with me, and then let's see how it goes. All right. I don't know how long that was, but maybe about a minute. So share this with people. Try to do the 60-second mind challenge. The whole point is this, is that when the rays of the mind converge, right? So when the eyes aren't doing one thing, the hands are doing something else, the mind is thinking something else. These are divergent rays. But when the rays converge, as they do when you put your attention on something, when the physical system is doing one thing, and the mental attention is on that as well. That's what we try to do there, is a kind of convergence. When the rays of the mind converge, when enough convergence is there, the way we perceive things changes, right? Because right now, the way we think of perception is that it's through the brain and the eyes and all of these things. But from a different perspective, all of these things that we call brain, eyes, etc., are actually mental functions. And that gets into some other stuff. We'll go over some of that stuff later. But the basic idea is, if that's true, if what we call the physical body is an expression of mental function, then if we alter the mental function through convergence, through focus and attention, then even what we call the physical senses and the way we perceive will change. And that's that gateway that I'm talking about, that gives us that third education without having to go through all of these formal systems, right? Going through the schoolhouse that you have within yourself. This is essential for any situation, but especially in emergencies. This third education gives us a foundation and a different perspective on what's happening that can improve the quality of our lives. Thanks for listening.